Welcome to Take the Pulse of Your Practice's Cash Flow and Improve Your Results, a webinar featuring Angie Slayton, presented by HealthFusion and Transworld Systems. HealthFusion's MediTouch is a leading EHR and practice management software that is 2014 Meaningful Use certified and ICD-10 ready. Transworld Systems is redefining the collection agency industry by providing businesses and healthcare organizations with better tools for accounts receivable, debt recovery, and past due accounts. This is Kathy McCoy on behalf of HealthFusion, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Today's presentation will last approximately 50 minutes, followed by a 10-minute question and answer session and a brief talk on HealthFusion. On the right side of your screen, GoToWebinar displays a control panel which can be expanded or hidden during the presentation by using the arrow at the top. To ask questions, you may use the questions box on the control panel. Just type your question in the space provided. We will compile these questions, which will be answered live by Angie during the Q&A session. To receive credit after the session, please complete the survey that will appear at the conclusion of today's webinar. To receive CME credit, you also need to complete a short post-test after the webinar. If you do not receive the survey or the email with the post-test link within 3 to 4 hours after the webinar, please email us at update@healthfusion.com. Today's agenda includes the featured presentation by Angie Slayton, a question and answer session, and a short presentation about how HealthFusion streamlines collections by Ian Gary. Now, let me briefly introduce our first speaker. Angie Slayton, Director of Marketing for Transworld Systems, has 20-plus years of entrepreneurial and corporate business experience, including medical practice management. So let's get started. Angie?
Hi, Kathy. Just 1 second while I pull up the presentation. All right. So today's presentation is talking about how to benchmark your practice's cash flow system. And you may have wondered how your practice compares to others in its ability to receive payments from patients. Well, in today's interactive webinar, we will find out. We conducted a survey to understand the front and back office procedures of many of our clients and if they were set up to get paid. Our survey responders included doctors, practice administrators, and office managers from all around the United States. And of course, all of them had outstanding patient balances. We've compiled this data, and it covers the top 6 ways that you can better your practice's payability, and that's what we're going to share with you today. Okay, so here's the process that we're going to go through. During the webinar, you will have the opportunity to score your practice amongst our responders and also participate by responding to polling questions with your fellow webinar attendees. We will not only share the national study findings, but the immediate results from the webinar attendees live. So I will show you the questions. If there's a poll associated with the questions, you will see it on your screen. Kathy is going to help me with this. You'll answer the poll. You'll have 10 seconds to respond. And there will be 9 polling questions throughout the webinar. I'll share the results from our national study, and Kathy will share the results from the webinar attendee. So you'll get on-the-spot answers from your peers showing just how your practice ranks on the payability scale. So grab a piece of paper and a pen, and you're going to number 1 through 20 down the far left-hand side and add 3 columns. So your paper should look something like what's on the screen. It doesn't have to be fancy, and it doesn't have to be straight, and these headings are just suggestions. But you can have your column for your practice, the national results, and then the webinar results. All right. While you're numbering, let's get started, and I'm going to show you the categories that we're going to cover today. The first one is maintaining patient engagement. The second is setting payment expectations. The third is front and back office billing processes. Fourth is forms, training, and updates. Fifth, patient payment follow-up. And lastly, on using a collection agency. Our first 4 questions are also polling questions. So we're going to need you guys to participate right from the start. We will ask you the question. You'll have 10 seconds to respond, and then we'll show you the answer. Remember to write them on your paper so you have a complete set of results at the end of the webinar. So, maintaining patient engagement. Getting paid starts before a patient even arrives, right? It's critical that your staff set the expectation with each patient that they need to arrive on time or early for their appointment. Most practices use a patient reminder system to help with these processes. So Kathy, could you start the poll for our first question? And our first question is, as part of your appointment setting process, do you stress the importance of prompt arrival? Your choices are yes or no. This is a simple, easy to include step in your appointment setting script that is used by your front office staff. So Kathy, can you show us the results? 88%. That's excellent. So let's start the second poll. Our second poll is, do you use a patient reminder system? Of course, both of these actions increase patient engagement from the onset of interacting with your practice and are going to increase your results. So we've got about maybe 8 seconds, 7 seconds to get your response in on that patient reminder system question. We will share those results with you in just a moment. 83%. Well, I have to give a gold star to our attendees today because you guys beat the national average. So we can take a look at that. 81.82% of our national study respondents use stress the importance of prompt arrival as a part of their appointment setting process, and 78.79% use a patient reminder system. So gold star to you guys, you already know that using a reminder service reduces administrative costs and improves efficiencies by lowering your no-show rates and cancellations. And of course, that improves your patient outcomes and increases revenue. So it's critical that your staff sets the expectation with the patient that their copay will be due the day of their appointment. Our next 2 questions, questions 3 and 4, are all polling questions. Kathy, can you start the poll for question 3? Prior to the appointment, do you set the expectation for payment at the time of service? Your choices are yes or no. Again, a simple, easy step to include in your appointment setting script that helps set the expectation of payment at the time of visit. 79%, okay. Our next question, Kathy, you can go ahead and start this, is do you set a billing at the time of scheduling? Doing this can reduce the check-in time at the appointment and the drain on administrative resources. Your options here are yes or no. And our results are 52%. Okay. Thanks for your engagement and participation. All right, so let's look at our national results. So for question number 3, prior to the appointment, do you set the expectation for payment at the time of service? 66% said yes. Our attendees on the line said 79%. So again, you guys are trending ahead of the national study. For setting up billing at the time of scheduling, just a little bit below. Was that, Kathy, do you remember if that was 52% yes or was that 52% no?
It was 52% yes, Angie.
Okay. All right. So really close, running neck and neck on the national average there. So our results show a lower adoption rate on these processes from the national side, and that can be an improvement opportunity for the practices that took this study, or if your practice fell into those categories. Now we're going to take a look at your front and back office billing processes. Sometimes these work hand in hand, and sometimes these are a little disjointed. We'll have more polling questions in a bit, but for now, just make sure to record your answers alongside of the national answers, and you can place an X in the box on the webinar column so you know you didn't miss anything when you're reviewing these later. So these questions, When do you take payment? Check-in or check-out, or neither? That would mean you bill the insurance sometimes. You would bill the patient later. And then question number 6, do you cross-train your front and back office staff on payment policies? 51.5% take payment at check-in, and 87, almost 88% cross-train their front and back office staff on payment policies. This is a critical piece to ensuring your patient continuity experience from end to end of their appointment. So question number 7, does your practice have a written policy including terms of payment? And if yes, is it provided to patients and signed to them to acknowledge receipt? So acceptable payment terms should be known by your practice team members, and those terms should be set and everyone should be aware of what they are. And they should also be reviewed by your office each year and acknowledged by patients annually during their visit. So let's take a look at what our national study respondents said. 90%, almost 91% have a written policy including terms of payment. This is critical. And then if yes, is it provided to patients and signed by them to acknowledge receipt? Yes, most of them do have it acknowledged by the patient. If that's updated and acknowledged annually, give yourself a gold star. All right, on to our forms, training, and updates section. Having properly structured billing forms will help ensure patient payment because a confused mind says no. So if a patient is looking at your forms and doesn't understand them, they're just going to put it aside. We're going to talk about that. Do you have an annual process for reviewing and updating your patient forms? And the next question, do you have a process for ensuring your patients complete your most current forms? We were really glad to see that the vast majority of practices have a process around ensuring patients complete the most current forms. But practices could financially benefit from a more diligent review of the forms. And what I mean by that is, does your practice, is the credit policy that you have in place, does it meet your current business goals? Or is it something that's been updated for the past decade and you just changed the year on it? If it's the latter, you might want to look at the context of that a little more closely to see if it aligns with your business goals. And then what about your statements around delinquent accounts? Do you have clauses in there to address how you handle it so it's not a surprise to your patient should their account become delinquent? Questions 11 and 12. So question 12 actually is a polling question. Question 11 is, does your practice use sample billing forms for staff training? And then question 12, Kathy, if you want to pull up that poll, is do your statements show a rolling balance at 60, 90, and 120 days? And your answers there are yes or no. Looks like our results are coming in. 82% said yes. Okay, very close to our national results. 80.3% show a rolling balance at 60, 90, and 120 days. So going back to question number 1, we're going to talk about a couple of best practices here. We had a really low response rate from our national survey of the practices using sample billing forms for staff training. If the office staff is unfamiliar with the statements that patients receive, the level of service that they can provide when fielding calls or questions could be reduced. And this is an area of opportunity for most practices, and it's really simple to do. Just include those statements in your training forms that you're reviewing with your staff. And then for question number 12, our webinar attendees are right on pace with the national average. And this is an area of opportunity for most practices. So what I'm going to say may seem counterintuitive, but showing a rolling balance actually deters payment. Because if a patient is looking at the statement box and it has 0 to 30 days, 30 to 60 days, 60 to 90 days, 90 days to 120 days, wherever their amount due is, until it's in the last box, it's not raising the critical flag of we have to pay this now. We've got, if we're at 30 to 60 days, we have 4 more boxes before we're sounding the alarms. So if that's an option to turn that off, we recommend doing that and saying that the payment is due now. All right, we are at the halfway point. So here's your opportunity, if you possibly missed one of these on your form, to check and see, make sure you have all of your answers. Help you maintain patient relationships. Let's see who's doing what. Our next question, question 17, is a polling question. And that is, have you completed a compliance review of your collection agency? Kathy, if we can see the poll on 17. And a compliance review would look like talking to them about their certifications, how they handle disclosures, how they handle medical accounts. So 23% have said yes that they did, which is excellent, gold star to you, and 77% said no, that they haven't. That's pretty much on par with our national average. Let's look at those results. 72.21% said no, they have not conducted a compliance review on their collection agency. This is a must-have. It is critical in today's medical business environment. The reason why is if you aren't familiar with your collection agency's compliance practices, their actions could actually put you at risk. So a couple of things to look for. They should specialize in medical collections. They should be focused on compliance. They should be able to speak to that as well as to their processes. Next question, question 18. Does your collection agency charge by a percentage of the account? 65.15% said yes, that their collection agencies charge by a percentage of the account. That's pretty typical. Within the agency world, there are some flat fee services and some contingency percentages. It really depends on the relationship that you have, the services your agency offers, and as well as the volume that comes through from your practice to theirs. If so, what percentage do they charge? Kathy, I believe we have a poll set up for this one. If we do, can we see it?
Yes.
Excellent. So your options here are no, my agency does not charge by percentage. 20 to 30%, yes they do. 30 to 40% is my rate, or over 40%. All right, great. So what you guys have here is pretty typical for on par with the national average. So what we have for our national results are 25% are in that 20 to 30% range, and we've got 16% in that 30 to 40% range, and 24% in the over 40% range. This is going to vary depending on your agency and your volume and the age of the accounts that you send over to them. So if you're looking to improve your rate, you want to have those discussions with your representative about how you can improve your rate and your results. Question number 20. And before we start this question, I'd actually like to clarify the first party process is a systematic, automated approach conducted in your practice's name. So if you're familiar with TransWorld Systems, this is our accelerator service. It's a series of 5 automated contacts alternating between letters and phone calls at designated intervals. And then for third party, this is at TransWorld Systems, our profit recovery service. It's identical in the methodology of the 5 contacts alternating between letters and phone calls, only it's made in the agency's name. So question number 20 is a polling question. Does your practice use an automated first-party follow-up system to avoid having to send patients to traditional collections? And Kathy, when you're ready, we can take a look at that poll. So 26% yes do use an automated first-party follow-up system. Let's take a look at our national results. Nationally, we found that 42% of the survey respondents use a first-party follow-up system to avoid sending their clients, their patients, to collections. And what we know is actually when practices use this type of service, the number of accounts that they have to send to a third-party service or actual live dialing collectors is significantly reduced. And then for question number 21, does your practice use an automated third-party follow-up system? 46.97% of our respondents said yes. What we do know is that when practices have set parameters around these business processes, their cash flow is improved. And so what I mean by set parameters is when an account is X days old, it goes into this process. When an account is X days old, it goes into this process. It takes the guesswork out of managing that. I hope everyone on the phone is doing something like that. Question 22, and our final question, is does your practice use live collectors? 62% of our national respondents said yes. So I'm going to take you to the summary page. This is all of our benchmark study results. Kathy, can you review the webinar polling questions that we had in the second half so the attendees can double check the accuracy of their scorecards?
Absolutely. For number 17, Angie, we had 72% who said no, compared to 72% here on the national. And for number 19, we had 16% said no. 20 to 30% being charged for collections was 36%, and 30 to 40% was 16%.
Great, thank you so much.
I'm sorry, and the number 20.
Oh, I apologize.
No, that's all right. I almost skipped it too. For number 20, our participants, 26% said yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So whether you are low on the payability scale right now or hitting the top of the charts, most of you who are responding were right up there or above the national averages. Your participation in today's interactive webinar is greatly appreciated. So you've seen for yourself and increase your ability to get paid. Kathy, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share our benchmark study with our results with our guests today, and appreciate working with you and HealthFusion.
Thank you very much, Angie. We'll begin our Q&A in just a moment, but before we begin, I just wanted to mention that after the Q&A, we will have a short presentation on how MediTouch helps you improve your collections. Now, let's begin our question and answer session. Angie, our first question from Cindy are, what's the best way to convince office staff who are opposed to collecting payments that it's a necessary and important part of their job?
That's a really great question, Cindy, and something that maybe it sounds like a training gap, that they need to understand how the business functions and that that's part of the process. So I would look at your training process and your documentation to make sure that you've hit all the key points and make it more like a checklist, that it's not a negative thing. It's a positive thing to be able to stay in business and to be able to continue to help patients with their continuity of care.
Great. Thank you very much, Angie. Our next question is from Pam, who asks, does the automated first set of calls prior to collections occur after the past due letters we sent, or does this process replace it?
Well, I'm not sure what you're doing right now, Pam, but for our Transport Systems Accelerator service, I can speak to that. And generally, how our clients use that effectively is after they send the first statement, and they do not receive payment after a determined amount of time. It could be 15 to 30 days. They go into the Accelerator program where they will receive a letter followed by a phone call, a letter followed by a phone call at designated intervals. So it can, if you're doing internal work like that, it can replace that. I hope that answered that question for you.
Great. Thank you very much, Angie. Our next question is from Shelley, and she asks, can you share some phrases that get patients to respond better to requests for payment?
So that would be a good question. I'm wondering if you're meaning after the office visit or if you're meaning while they're in the office. But we can pull some tips together, and Kathy, I can share them with you. We can send them out afterwards. I can take a look at what some of our people use actually on the line, and we can share those with our attendees.
That sounds great. We'd be happy to send those out. Great. And our next question is from Kennedy, who asks, how do you set up billing app scheduling? How do you manage that?
Could you repeat the question?
Kennedy asks, how do you set up billing at the point of scheduling?
So while you're taking setting the appointment, you ask them for their contact information, address, phone number, etc., and their insurance information. You can ask at that time if they'll be using insurance or if they'll be a cash pay patient.
Great. Thank you very much, Angie. Our next question is from James, who asks, can you suggest some good ways to phrase the need for on-time arrival when making a patient appointment?
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite ones, and my pediatrician's office uses this. And they say, we know everyone's busy, and to respect everyone's time and increase our patient flow and increase the likelihood that you'll see the doctor on time, we ask that our patients arrive 15 minutes early for their appointment to complete any necessary paperwork and see the doctor in a timely fashion.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing that. Our next question is from Steve, who asks, can you describe what a good written financial policy should include?
That is a really great question, and one that I don't think that I can answer succinctly on this call. It's also something you would probably want to review with your lawyers, but you would want to cover the bases of your billing practices, your collection practices, any terms that you extend, etc. This is a very top line.
Great. Thank you very much. Angie, our next question is from John, who asks, what's the best policy on leaving messages for patients with past due balances?
Also something to review with your lawyer. You want to make sure that the person's name if it's a recording, it has to say the patient's name only. So if someone were calling me, they would need to say, my voicemail would need to say, you have reached voicemail for Angie Slayton, not the Slayton residence or the Slaytons or Angie. You need to identify that the place where you are leaving the message is specifically for the patient and cannot be heard by other people.
Thank you very much, Angie. Those are all of our questions for today. This concludes the educational portion of our webinar. To learn more about how MediTouch helps you improve your collections, please stay on the line. And Ian Gary, Director of Channel Partnerships for HealthFusion, will tell you how HealthFusion helps you simplify your practice collection. Ian?
Hi, thank you very much, and I appreciate everybody's both attendance and participation in the webinar today. And I just want to quickly touch on some elements that dovetail very nicely with what the discussion we've already had are, and then of course, if there are any additional questions that come up around either workflow ideas or the software, feel free to fire away with those once we're done. So I have activated my screen now, and we're looking easy to set up what we refer to as collections rules, where you can say, okay, after a certain set of parameters has been achieved, this person has received 1 or 2 or 3, whatever strikes your fancy, number of collection letters with no payment over a given period of time, and will automatically move those into a collections bucket, which you can then automatically assign letters to, notices to, and affect the way they show up in your AR. And once, of course, they are within that, you can actually categorize them and put them in work lists, or even export them if you want to a third-party collections agency. We do, of course, have an automatic relationship with TransWorld in place where you could even say, all right, well, once someone falls into a particular collections category that you've established, we've even sent them notification letters that they are in the collections category. Heck, you know what? Let's just move those over to TransferWorld and have them work for you. So those of you that were responding to the question about having personnel doing collections calls for you or reaching out to patients for outstanding balances, you can actually move that away from you and your staff, because the reality is, in most practices, even larger practices, your front office staff could feel extremely awkward making calls like that and then having to interact with those patients when they come in. And everyone in your organization is going to be conscious of those kind of things. You may live in a community where you see these people socially outside of the office. You go to the same church, you go to the same gym, whatever the case may be, and calling their house and leaving a message regarding a collections issue that comes to you personally can be an awkward scenario. This is the real world. And so it's very easy to take a process that you either may be doing or maybe managing with kind of a mishmash of, oh yeah, once I see him at a certain point in my AR, we've got to dust out this collections letter that we have somewhere, and then tell Mary she's got to go ahead and call those people, and then really how do you annotate that in your software at all? You can just make that process completely automated. Set rules up that say, hey, if it's been this long, if we've sent this letter out and we're missing this much money, move it into the collections cases and we can work it from there. Or you know what, we can actually just click a box and TransferWorld will take over, or you can hit export and move those, if you prefer, to another collection solution. So the point is, you can do exactly zero more work, as a matter of fact, less work than you're doing now, just to establish what those parameters are. And as we looked at in all those statistical analysis there, simply having processes in place for collections and then having a methodical way in which it is approached and then having dedicated staff, whether they're yours or externally, that handle these is going to increase your collections more than, and this is, I should pause here and throw in a wonderful disclaimer, what I'm about to say is my personal opinion and doesn't necessarily reflect the opinion of the organization, but to me, having a collections process in place that is executed by a group of professionals is going to do a lot more for your collections than, say, the way you word your fiduciary consent form when the patient signs in, or how many minutes early you have them come for their initial enrollment documentation and intake. A lot of times, these things feel like that we're doing something, but really managing it in a professional way or having a dedicated professional manage it is going to matter a lot more than what it says on your intake form. And with that, if there's any additional questions about either our software platform or perhaps larger industry questions in general that I can answer, I'd be happy to. But that pretty much brings us to the close of the segment regarding the software.
Thank you very much, Ian. And Angie, we thank you as well. Thank you to our listeners for joining us. We were happy to have had you with us today, and we hope that you found this information beneficial. When you exit this broadcast, you will see a survey. To receive CEU credit from Paycom for this session, just complete this survey. If the survey does not appear, you will also receive an email within 3 to 4 hours after the webinar, which will include a link to the survey. However, if you have any further problems, please send an email to update@healthfusion.com. For CME credit, you will also need to take a short post-test. You will also receive an email after the session, as I mentioned, which will include the email address to the survey and will provide links to the recording of today's session. Please allow up to a week to receive your CEU and